Hello, friends. Welcome to Soul Talk Tuesday. I am thrilled, whether you are here with us live, watching it on a Tuesday, or you are here watching it and it's not Tuesday and you're pretending. That's just fine with me. I'm glad to have you here. We have an amazing special guest tonight. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, the point of Soul Talk Tuesday, how Soul Talk Tuesday came into being, is a conversation with someone who said, Ariana, you have really cool friends. And I said, yes, I do have really cool friends. I should introduce them to you. It would be really fun to introduce you to some of my cool friends. And I have a very wide diversity of friends. And so today I am thrilled to introduce you to my friend, Benn. And I'm thrilled to introduce you to Benn because Benn is just a cool, laid back, easygoing guy who happens to be a Druid. So some of us know people who are Druids and some of us don't. I know a couple. I feel very blessed to know a couple of Druids. But you know, I honestly don't know as much as I would like to know about being a Druid. So, and about what that means and about why it's important in today's world and how that supports you, Ben, in a time like now, which we were talking about before we went on air, where it's just a crazy time, right? Like it's a crazy time. Does it feel crazy to you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And thanks again for having me. It's very kind of you to invite me on. Yeah, it has been crazy. And all around in all sorts of different facets of life.
So I need to ask you an almost embarrassing question because, you know, when you know somebody, you should know how to pronounce their name. But I have never had to
Oh,
pronounce his name. It's been Ben to me.
yeah, yeah.
You who speak the Irish language, there must
Mhm.
be a secret to this. It probably doesn't sound like anything like it looks.
No, it with Irish, unfortunately, typically it doesn't look anything like it's spelled. But once you learn the rules, you can muddle your way through. But it's Benn Mac Stiofán, and it's just Ben, son of Stephen, and that's my father's name. So, yeah,
Very good.
yeah.
Very good. Well, tell us a little bit about you first before we get started. Just tell us a little bit so these folks have an idea kind of what your day-to-day life is, because you're not that kind of druid that's wearing long flowy gowns and hanging out in the woods. Or maybe you
Yeah, only secretly what do I do that. No, I mean basically, I grew up here in Colorado Springs. I and I've tried living other places, but it never really seemed to work out very well. Um, and I really identify with Colorado, and I feel like that's the mountains and the landscape here is a huge part of my identity. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was drawn to Druidry in the first place, was just because I've always felt bigger than myself when I actually open my heart up to what's going on in the landscape. And different places make me feel different things, like they do most people. And I guess I'm just more of an obsessive about it, really, than anything else. Um, I I founded a small group called the Dún Mór Druid Order. We're actually going to be launching a podcast ourselves by the end of this week. So I'm excited about that. And I'm working on a book right now about the synodic cycle of Venus and its relationship to the Goddess Brigit. Um, and Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm a father. I've got three kids. My son just moved out. He just moved to Denver, like literally yesterday. So I'm a little sad about that. But I'm, of course, happy for him. He's more than ready to be out there on his own. And but he's a very gentle, very caring, um, and just a wonderful human being to have around. So, you know, it's definitely, I'll definitely miss him.
Yeah, I went through that last year when Ryan went off to college, and my heart kind of just went to Fort Collins with him. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's just a part of you, that old cliche about when you have children, a part of you walks around, the part your heart walks around in somebody else's body for the rest of your life. Yeah,
Yeah.
I get that. So, so are you doing the homeschool thing for the other kids?
Well, no, because my youngest son Sage graduated this in the fall. So, you know, so there's no more schooling to be done in the house, at least, you know, for public school.
Nice.
Yeah. So, and yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of people his age, he's really unsure. I mean, they're all three of them really unsure what they're supposed to do or what they're going to do right now, because, you know, um, they want to get educated, but they're also worried about the debt that comes along with getting educated, and you know, just those things that cause cause us to doubt, you know, our future path. But I think they're really. It's been interesting though, because I one of the things that I see about this generation is that I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot going on underneath, and I just don't have a lot of concerns about them. And uh, I really feel that they have a certain amount of open-mindedness and a commitment to a broader social equality that the world needs. And, you know, if they say the youth is our conscience, then I think they're doing what they can.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's a lot of good coming our way. I think they are the face of change, and they have a lot to say to all of us. And I hope in my own children's case that I have instilled some values that you know, will help them along the way, and certainly being open-minded is one of them. And so as we begin and we kind of step into this conversation, Ben, there was a time in this country, I don't know how old you are, but I'm thinking somewhere close to my age.
How old am I again? I always forget. Let's see.
Check the,
It's 2020, 48, 48, 48. Yeah.
you're, you're a few years younger than me then.
Oh, okay.
In this, do you remember a time when the idea of being a druid was something that you had to kind of keep to yourself? Was there a time or life that you had to hide that or worry about who knew that?
Yeah, I would say that's, you know, a pretty common experience among a lot of pagans in general. Um, and I think the most intense time for me was probably in high school when I was here in the Springs. But although when I was going through high school, it was before um, some of the more what I would call um, some of the more homophobic elements had come to Colorado Springs. And when I was going through high school, I don't remember it being that big of a deal. I mean, I knew that there were people who had experienced some, you know, some oppression and some other things that had made them feel uncomfortable about who they are. But I also knew a lot who had just, you know, who were very open about their sexuality. But, you know, it was one of those things that um, I didn't know any other druids at the time, and I didn't really, I hadn't quite labeled it druidry at that point. I knew that I had certain interests in mythological cycles and um, Irish and Scottish customs, and um, my grandmother, who is of Scottish descent, was always just very interested in her family and her family history, and she was um, she grew up in Canada on a farm, and they had retained some of their Scottish traditions, and so I learned some of those from her. But I'd also had experiences of a more mystical nature, and I didn't know anybody at the time who had similar experiences. So, there's a lot of self-doubt that comes along with that, and a lot of um, I guess fear and just opening up, because you don't know how other people are going to react to it. And at the time, I didn't know, was this something that was just, maybe a psychological condition, or was I experiencing something real? And that makes it, it's hard to navigate that, just and understand what the truth is. So, but by the time I got to college, I really had, I had found a good circle of friends who were very open-minded, and I didn't feel judged. I felt accepted, and that made all the difference. When you've got someone who really, they look at you and they accept you, and you feel, just when you feel accepted, it's easier to accept them, and it just sort of builds off each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry about that. I just suddenly realized the battery was dying, and the
Oh, no, it's no problem.
so I had it's there. Um, maybe we should go back a little bit and ask you to define Druidry. What is that really? I think for a lot of us, if we haven't been around any kind of pagan traditions, and even if we've been exposed to certain levels of paganism, I'm not sure that after many years of studying in that area, could actually define the difference between Druidry and other places in pagan paths.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I always kind of think about this in a couple of different ways. So, if you wanted the historical, cultural definition of what Druidry is, then you're talking about a group of people among the Celtic nations, what we call the Celtic nations nowadays. So that would be the Breton, the Irish, the Manx, the Scots, and the Welsh. And that's defined broadly by the fact that they all speak an Indo-European Celtic language. And the Druids were a class in our society that was similar to the Brahmin caste in India. So the doctors, the healers, the craftsmen, the poets, the scholars, the diviners, all the people who fulfilled the functions that any civilization needs in order to survive. And along with that comes a whole cosmology and set of practices and everything else. But I think beyond just that simple but accurate cultural definition of what Druidry is, and the essence of it, I think Druidry is about attaining a state of remembrance where you're not becoming something greater than what you've always been. You're just remembering what you've always been. And the veils that have covered your memory are lifted, and you finally get to see who you are for what you are. And along with that comes the knowing that you can't achieve that kind of spiritual attainment on your own. You need the partnership of the landscape in order to unlock those doors in you. And the realization that you and the landscape are one is where it all starts.
Yeah, that's interesting. First of all, I heard in your description some availability to education. That there's these things that you're talking about. Some herbology and stuff like that you can learn from that can be traditional and passed down. But a lot of the things that you were talking about have require the ability to read, the ability to write, the ability to apprentice with someone in the most original times and forms of Druidry. And obviously those things are available to most of us now. But there's also the second piece that you talked about that is related to intuition and the ability to, are you familiar with a book called Last Child in the Woods?
I'm not.
It's a great book. It was written by a man named Richard Louv, and it essentially puts forward into society that if we don't take our kids out into the woods, if we don't get them out in nature, then the only thing that when they grow up to be adults, the only thing they'll be able to think of in terms of nature is that it's a resource they can use. So when I heard him speak, he spoke about the fact that most of us can remember a favorite natural setting from our childhood. Most of us could say, yep, I know exactly where I used to play, or I know where my fort was, or there was a place I used to hide to go by myself, or I used to walk down this trail. But children of today, many of them don't have exposure to the natural landscape. They spend most of their time at home. And if parents don't take kids out and make them feel safe, then they don't go. They stay in the neighborhood. They stay in a very kind of cultivated environment rather than the natural environment. And so one of the things that he said that really stuck with me was he said, some of us have the idea that we have dominion over nature, and some of us have the idea that we're stewards of nature. And the important thing for us to remember is that we are nature, which is a really powerful statement and very in line with what you're saying when you say, I'm one with the landscape. I wonder how that, in its more intuitive sense, in your more intuitive experience, how that manifests in your life, that oneness.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it did start for me in childhood. I mean, my father had a home up in Woodland Park, and I was very fortunate, very blessed to have. Basically, it just was right up against national forest land, so it was it was just a huge expanse of ponderosa forest, and that was where I think everything kind of coalesced for me as far as what it meant to be to recognize that the landscape is alive and conscious, because I had always, whenever I was out, I never felt that we have this way of excluding consciousness and destiny from things that don't move. So if it's a tree or a plant or a stone, or a star, anything along those lines, or a creek, we tend to sort of look at them as things. And I had always felt, since I was young, that when I was there, I was in no way alone. And so I think it starts in a lot of ways with like almost an animistic revelation. And I think animism is sort of the root of where Druidry comes from. So if you were to picture Druidry as a tree, then animism is like the taproot, the one that goes really deep and really goes down far. And it's one that every culture on Earth shares, that animistic root, that original animistic revelation. And I guess that sense is the the thing that has, if it's one thing that I would want Druidry to impart to people, is that sense that that you're dealing with beings and who may have a different level of consciousness than you do and different levels of destiny than you might, but they are there for a reason. They've been created for a reason, just like you've been created for a reason. And having a certain amount of humility to look at those things and say, I'm neither above you and I am not below you. We all share the blessing of being created, and with the fact that we exist is enough. And so one of the ways that I manifest that is with offerings, and offerings, may seem, I'll leave it pouring a little whiskey at the bottom of a tree, or leaving a cookie out for the fairy folk. Those things may seem superstitious and they may seem sort of trivial to some people, but when you start to actually do it, and you recognize that it is changing your consciousness, it's changing the way you're interacting with the created world, then it becomes a lot more than just, a superstition. It becomes a central part of your understanding of how things work.
Yeah. One of the things that Mark does every day is Mark has a little set of bells that he rings in the morning to say good morning to the Fae. So we have these practices.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, so it's, think about it this way. If you lived in a neighborhood full of people, but you never spoke to anybody, they probably wouldn't speak to you either. Right? If you don't smile at people, you don't acknowledge them, you don't say, hey, good morning, or gosh, I really appreciate you, or how was your day, or, I love what you did to your house, or whatever, then they're probably not going to communicate with you either. One of the things that Mark and I have both found is paying attention and talking. And sometimes that's talking out loud and sometimes it's sitting with, but to connect to the land is to connect to an individual tree, to an individual flower, to each life form that you see. So if you were to visit my house, you would watch us pick up a bug and talk to it as we took it back outside. Oh, little one, there's no food for you in here. You need to go back where there's food, right? Or I can't put you outside because there's snow, so I'm going to put you right here in this plant where, please don't go crawling all over because it won't be pretty if you scare me, right? We have some really interesting understandings as human beings. One is that if I'm bigger than it's not as smart as me, right? So
Right.
Spider, not as smart as me, doesn't have the brain that I have. Plants, flowers, ants, not as smart as me. And it's interesting for me to consider what I think of as smart, what smart means to me, versus consciousness, right? So we equate smart to what we have learned, to the ability to use our brain and store information and then regurgitate it back out, which is different than wisdom. So wisdom means I've now stored the information, I've applied it to life, I've learned something about it, and now I can, can move into a place of wisdom about that subject. But all of that is related to how we as human beings do things versus the consciousness of nature and the many ways that it relates to us, the voice or feel of the wind, the heat of a fire or the glow of a fire, those kinds of things. Is your experience and your teaching similar to that?
Yeah, I mean, as an example, I just went on a amazing, it was just a 2 day overnight trip into the Terrials, and I, it was one of those things where, I'm having to sort of sandwich it between work and, and my days off. And, you got to be flexible when those things, when those timelines come up. So I had to hike in the dark. And it was a place I'd never been before. And it was, we had to hike over some big boulder scree to get in. So it was a little stressful because I had a really big pack on my back. And if I'd fallen, I could have seriously hurt myself. So I had to be very, very awake. And by the time that I got into the campsite, it was dark. I'd never camped there before. I had to set up in the dark. And I have always, based on my experiences that I've accumulated over the years, I've come to see places like a campsite as this is the living room of the spirits, of a spirit or numerous spirits. And you don't just barge in. It's like if I was just to walk into your house and sleep on your couch, you'd be like, who the hell are you and what are you doing in my house? Can you at least introduce yourself here? And so my friend had been there many times, but I'd never been. And so I decided to not set up camp. I just put down a sleeping pad and laid underneath the Milky Way. And it was absolutely glorious. And, there were ants crawling on me at some points in the night. And, it wasn't necessarily the most comfortable night that I've ever spent out, but it was, I hadn't seen the Milky Way like that in months. And it's always so astounding when you get to see something that your ancestors would have seen. And you realize, I think in those moments, that there is such a tenuous difference between you and what you see as the created world or the landscape, because we're not autonomous beings. We can't exist without it. And so the air you're breathing, the water you're drinking, the stones you're walking on, the trees that are growing around you, all these things have been set in motion for aeons of time, and you're visiting it in this particular lifetime as with a particular facet of consciousness, with a particular viewpoint that's unique, and it's rare, and it's special, and you have just as much value as everything around you that you see. And so I guess the long and short of that would be that when it comes to the way we identify with things, my whole desire when it comes to Druidry is to make the difference between me and what I see as perforated, not as clear boundaries and lines, because we can get lost as human beings when we think that we are cut off and alone, when we think that when the drama that's going on inside the mind is all that we are. And that reality that we all live in, especially right now with the pandemic and all the stresses that everybody's going through, which are so very, very challenging and very difficult. There is a way to open that up and breathe a little bit, even inside of all of that drama. And not having, and I guess the way I sort of break this down is you have exclusive consciousness and you have inclusive consciousness. And an inclusive consciousness realizes that there is a network of existence that everything relies on everything else. And then there's an exclusive consciousness that decides that it's going to be on its own. It's going to be an island in the sea of reality and not relate to other things. But that's only done usually out of a need for safety or as a response to trauma. And so if we can recognize the fact that we don't need that to survive, and we don't need that to, that we can actually thrive with an inclusive consciousness, then it's, once you've made that leap, I think it's hard to go back. I think it's really hard to go back.
Yeah, I do too. And I think it's easy to talk about the landscape that way. Like we talk about the trees and the flowers and the plants and the animals and all of that, that have a level of consciousness in a way, you know, like the stones. Stones have a very interesting existence, a very interesting communication form, because in my experience, most of them move really slowly. Like you have to be patient. Okay, I'm here whenever you're
Patience.
ready. Because they've, for a really long time, they're not in any hurry. It's us who are scurrying about and like, I don't have time to wait on this, you know, tell me right now. So I also think that everything, and we had talked about animism, which speaks to the aliveness of everything, that there is an existence and aliveness, consciousness in all things, that we are animated by a divine force. Everything is alive. So I think that for me carries over into how I relate to my automobile and what I expect of my computer. You know, like these things have names, and I have conversations about my expectations. I have conversations with my son's car about my expectations for who that vehicle will be in his life, that it won't leave him stranded anywhere, that it will get him to a safe place if he has need. And I have full expectation for that to be so. It's not for me, there's no question about, we're communicating, I'm expressing, doesn't always mean I'm in charge, but you know, that all things have life. All things are here, made up of the same stuff of the universe that we are. And when you look at the Milky Way, you're looking at something that relates all the way down to the cellular level of who you are, and you are spinning with it and within it.
Yeah. I mean, in Irish, they call the Milky Way Bealach na Boina, which is the way, the path, the road of the white cow, and that relates to Bowen, who is a lot like so the Boyne in Ireland was once very much revered, just like the Ganges is in Ireland, or in India. It was seen as, you know, the embodiment of the earthly embodiment, the river, the water embodiment of the Milky Way. So they were reflections of one another. And we have always, in so many of the stories, this constant reminder that what is big is always reflected in what is small. And what one shape relates to another shape, and one state of mind relates to another state of mind, one being to another being. That there's always some sort of connection going on that enables things to actually move forward, for creation to surprise itself. So that, you know, there's magic inside of that, in the sense that we look at connections as human beings, and and when we have that sense of wonder, and we realize that we are in a myth right now, we are in a great story right now. We are writing we are writing a great epic right now. So that when these things happen, you know, whether it's a pandemic or whether it's tragedy in the family, you know, like, you know, my mom died of multiple myeloma way too young. And it was not something I'd wish on anybody, and it certainly is something I wish I hadn't gone through. But around that time, I was hiking. I was just on a walk in the mountains, and I came across this tree. It was a ponderosa, and it had been hit by lightning at some point, probably 30, 40 years ago. And it had probably killed half the tree when the lightning struck it. But it had survived, and because of what had happened to it, it had used one of its side branches to come out, and it had curled around where it had been broken and was climbing up, and it made the most exquisite curve, and the way some of the branches were shaped were sort of smaller but really lush greenery. And it was such a revelation to me, because it was like, that tree, it's not like that tree pissed off the gods, like the gods weren't like, how dare you, ponderosa pine, you have offended us for the last time, it just happened. It just happened. But because of what had taken place, it now looked like no other tree in the forest. It was completely unique and completely beautiful. And it's so hard to see that, right after the lightning strike, and when the bark is still on fire. But as time goes by, we regain that sense of who we are, and we regain that sense of how perfect life is, that those experiences shape us into something that no one else can be. Then maybe we finally are able to open up to some gratitude, even in horrible situations.
Right. And this circumstance that we're in now is challenging. We are definitely challenged right now. Growth is very rarely comfortable, right? Growth generally has,
Yeah.
I mean, I raised 4 boys. My boys would have growing pains, real literal, like got to sit up with them at night and rub their feet, rub their knees, because
the body
was growing faster than the joints could keep up. And to recognize, not to have an expectation that growth has to be painful, but to recognize that when we are in a time of change, we can interpret it through the lens of pain rather than through the lens of growth. There's tremendous growth going on right now, for every one of us in so many ways. So
Yeah.
Tell me how, in this time, what are the practices, the Druidic practices, that are getting you through? And as you share that, tell us a little bit also about this order of yours and why you started this order and kind of how that happened.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, as far as practices go, one of the ways in which the Druids conceptualized the body and the spirit was that it's similar sort of to the chakra system in India, but different. So they visualized it as, or they conceived of the body having 3 cauldrons. So you have Koragoria in your pelvic girdle, which is like they're seen as cauldrons inside the body. And Koragoria means like the cauldron, or the vortex of warmth. And as long as that cauldron is sitting upright, you're alive and you're healthy. It's sort of the biological, energetic center of the physical body. And then in the heart, there's another cauldron called Kora Erma, and it means motion, or the cauldron of guidance. your navigation system through life. And then there's the cauldron in the head, which is Korosoish, and it's like the cauldron of knowledge or the cauldron of wisdom, and it's your connection to the eternal, to that which is, you know, to the Milky Way, to that which is above you, or, you know, completely awesome and cool. And so one of the practices that I do in the morning and is basically to cleanse those cauldrons out, and I do that with sound and breath. It takes about a half an hour, but it makes a tremendous difference because one of the things that I've always struggled with since I was young, I had a pretty serious epileptic condition when I was younger, and and I don't know the terms for it now. I believe they've changed the terms, but back when I had it, they called it petit mal and grand mal. And petit mal was like, you just sort of, you can see and experience the world, but you can't interact with it in any way. It's just, you can't move, you can't speak, you're just taking in the world. You can't relate back to it. And then grand mal was, you know, where you pass out and you convulse and do all those sorts of things. And I think because of some of those experiences, I felt, you know, kind of like a freak, and which I still am, but, you know, I'm just better with it now than I was then. Because of a lot of those experiences, I think I developed a habit of just keeping a lot of anxiety in my chest, where I can really feel the stress and the fear and the worry and the concern in my heart. And this practice, if I do it daily at the beginning of the day, I don't have that anymore. Hold on, sorry.
Just lost your camera.
Yeah, give me a second here. Okay, sorry about that. So that's the practice that I do. There's some others, but that's probably the one that I go to daily that's helped tremendously, especially now. And then when it comes to the Druid Order, I've set it up. We're still sort of in its infancy, and it's just a way of, I wanted to get to know other Druids and to learn from them and to share experiences with them. And I've met some wonderful people doing it now. And a lot of it really is built around the idea that of what we call the three sacred teachings, and they are: I am the other, the people and the land are one, and diversity is the expression of sacred unity. And I've felt that those three things, as long as I, regardless of what I may learn or any revelations that I may have, as long as they're sort of going along with those three teachings, then I know that I'm on the right track. Because, you know, we've all seen how easy it is for religion and spirituality to be used as a cudgel to justify all sorts of horrible things. And if I am initially presented with something that distances me from other human beings or other creatures, then I know it's something to be skeptical of. I know it's a teaching that I don't need, and that it's ultimately not going to serve me very well. So a lot of it comes down to I am the other as being the foundation of the teaching of the order. And we get to geek out on things that we like. You know, we get to talk about Irish folklore and spiritual practices and the myths and the stories and the ways in which our particular families have manifested those cultural traits. And I'd always wanted to be a part of a group of people who no one had to feel better than anybody else. We didn't have to feel like there was a teacher or there were underlings or anything like that. I just wanted to be a part of a fellowship of people who were committed to exploring it and understanding it in a way that transformed them.
Yeah, it's a powerful experience to connect with people.
Yeah.
That idea that I am the other, that we are one with each other and with all things, is really foundational to unity. That there really is only one.
Mm.
You know, I get kind of the old ethics of, as above, so below are useful. Like you were talking about the reflection of the Milky Way and the river. Those things are useful because we are able to understand something above us that we can't access as easily by watching what's on the same plane as us, but not getting lost in the idea that it's binary, that,
Yes.
that one reflects the other and in either case, right? So the Milky Way reflects the river as much as the river reflects the Milky Way. It's such an interesting thing to consider yourself at one with all things. I've been my COVID project, I've been saying my COVID therapy has been taking a story and having it illustrated, a story that I wrote in 2007. And I loosely say I wrote the story because I was sitting by the side of a river on a rock and the river told me the story. And so I've had these wonderful conversations.
Oh, wow. That's so Celtic. That's so Celtic. There's an old saying that at the riverside, poetry is revealed to poets, or destiny is revealed to the destined. That's cool. That's really cool. Yeah.
And to get somebody to really get, yes, yeah, okay, it's my story, to get out there, but it's not my story. It was, it's not like hearing with your ears in the same way. It's a revealing, like the story was there for me. And that understanding that nature communicates in a different way, that things are not binary in a oneness mentality, that you are as important as the recipient as the story is to the teller, right? It takes both the teller and the recipient for the story to come. It takes the learning that happens is not just happening for you and the tree. It's not just happening for you from the tree or from the tree back. It's happening for both of you at the same time, because the two energies that are meeting create a perfect place for that particular story to emerge. And if it wasn't you, and it wasn't that moment, and everything wasn't, the wind wasn't just the way it was, and the sun wasn't just where it was in the sky, that story would not be the emergent story. So right, this, what I love about nature traditions is that they invite us to really understand that in our oneness, we are the perfect expression of something that can't express without us.
Mm.
Time, a story, a place, or whatever. And they involve everything, walking through the woods and seeing the trees and understanding that everyone is unique, that it's not, yes, it's a grove, but if you walk around and you look at every tree, they're all different. It's a crowd of people, but if you walk around and look at them, they're all different. They all have something different. So what I love about Druidry, and also know so little about, is the connection to the trees. That's the story that we all hear, that the Druids knew about the groves, the sacred groves, and the places to go. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I think, unfortunately, it's a broken tradition, so we have to speculate on a lot of things. So, I'm going to engage in some completely unfounded, wild speculation here, but and then just personal experiences. But I think that in fact, there's a place in in Ulster that you can go to, that is a yew grove that has literally been sculpted and shaped into a long hallway. It's from the time that they were little trees. They've basically groomed them in this way to make a cathedral out of these trees. And there's a lot of speculation that the original design of some of the medieval and Gothic cathedrals was based on the because if you look at them, they look a lot like groves of trees. They're these big, sweeping arches that come up in pillars on the side, and there's also speculation that the Druids may have sculpted these groves, that they were not just some of them probably were wild old groves, but some of them may have been cultivated and actually shaped over time. And the word Druid comes from Druid, which is the oak knowers, or the ones who with the knowledge of the oaks. And there's a lot to that. You'll, like in a lot of traditions, a particular, oh boy, I think my battery is going crazy here. Give me just a second. I may have to take my headset off.
That's all right. I understand.
Yeah. Give me just a second here.
Okay.
Can you still hear me?
Can hear you.
Okay. Okay, good. Let me reset this. All right.
It's always hard with that little pointy thing at the bottom, isn't it?
No. I wish they would. Yeah. There we go. Okay. And so there is this sort of, I think the sense too, especially when you look at an oak tree, it's a very slow growing, very ancient, deep rooted being. And I think that when you look at the nascency of Druidry, it's the outgrowth of a number of different tribes and a number of different clans inside of those tribes. And one of the challenges that Celtic civilization always had was clan warfare and the intertribal conflicts. And Druidry, in my opinion, was an attempt to unify Celtic culture under a common spiritual perspective or spiritual revelation. And they took the oak tree as the symbol of that revelation, which was, we may have all these different branches, we may have different tribes and different lands that we live on, but we're ultimately the same people. We're ultimately the same living being. And so I think that they looked at trees as sort of the ultimate example of what it meant to be a complete being, a complete tribe, because back then, we didn't really have so much of a sense of individuality in the sense, but it was more of a tribal perspective. And so the tree carries that kind of wisdom, I think, for the culture, especially back then. And also the understanding that half of the tree is in the ground. It's half of it you can't see. And so the roots of something down in the dark where it's quiet and still are just as important as the branches above in the sunlight and in the wind. And that recognition that light and dark are necessary to the total functioning of a human being, or to a tribe, or to um, any living thing, is that polarity drives life forward, and helps it to thrive. And especially when it comes to trees, one of the things that I love to do is if when I'm on my own, and I've never tried this as a group. It'd be interesting to try it as a group, but I will find a tree. I will sit down a few feet away. I will just acknowledge I will look at it, acknowledge who it is, the uniqueness of that particular tree. And if there's a knot hole, I'll try to find one with a knot hole. And when I breathe out, I picture that I'm just breathing. My breath is going into the tree. And when I'm breathing in, I'm receiving its breath. And that connection, and there's nothing really, odd about it. It's a very simple practice, but it's unusually connective. And one of my favorite, this comes from a teacher who I love named Orion Foxwood. And he says, if you want to look at the way in which we have a relationship with trees, he says, humans are the ultimate seekers and trees are the ultimate summoners. So we're always looking around. We're always wanting to know new experiences. We want to go to new landscapes. We want to see new horizons. We want to break through boundaries. But a tree is the ultimate summoner. The tree knows how to bring the things and experiences that it needs to it without moving. And that's a dynamic that I think that the more we work with and the more we understand, I think we would benefit tremendously as a civilization and a people.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. I think it falls in line with an understanding of divine masculine and divine feminine, and what energy in the world is dynamic and what energy in the world is magnetic, and how important it is that we have both of those. And
interesting. Yeah.
Have them in ourselves, that we tend to be moved as human beings in a very dynamic motion. But there is a tremendous peace that comes in sitting still and calling what you need to you, and allowing it to come, and being patient and cultivating the skills of stillness that allow the time and the turning of the universe to bring what it is that you are seeking to you, rather than having to go out and continually work to find it. One is a lot of work, and one is a game of waiting.
Yeah, patience, I think, is super important, especially because you realize, I think, over time, when you're trying to consciously relate to the landscape, that it is operating on a different timeline than you. And so if you expect these sort of immediate results, which we're just so obsessed with in today's culture, we want to put something out there, and we want A plus B to equal C. We want it to happen immediately. And if it doesn't happen immediately, we dismiss the reality of it, or we trivialize it as a pursuit that's not worth our time. But the great thing about the land is that the longer you stay with it, and the more you commit to letting it reveal itself to you on its timeline, and letting go of your timeline, then something really magical takes place, and you have you see that it's like water on stone. When those two things come together, the shapes that are created are so unbelievable, and those don't happen overnight. That kind of beauty takes a long time, and it takes it's a tidal process. The water hits the rock and recedes, hits the rock and recedes, hits the rock and recedes. And those are the only ways that's the only way you get those incredible shapes. And your spirit and your soul is the same thing. You've got to be patient with your own the own process of revealing the beauty that you have.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Thank you, Ben. It's an hour goes really fast.
Boy, yeah, it sure does.
Just we could just talk about this for a really long time. I'm hoping that those who are here will stick around. We'll have a little question and answer period after we're done. But I just want to say thank you so much. One of the lovely things about living in Colorado Springs is that we have access to nature in a really unique way. We have water, we have snow, we have sun, we have so many different variants, high desert, but then something that doesn't feel like desert at all. You know, it's a very unique and interesting place to be. And there are many opportunities for all of us to connect. Sometimes we have a feeling that we need to go out to connect. So I want to invite you to remember that you are one with the land where you are. You don't have to go anywhere. You can, and you can be patient and be there. But you can connect with a houseplant that you are caring for. You can connect with the lawn that's growing and what is beyond your vision in that area. You can connect with the trees in your yard and give them a name and honor them and respect them and acknowledge them and watch how they will relate back once you begin. Once they kind of get over the fact that, oh, what, are you talking to me?
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite, the other practice that I love is just walking outside on my lawn in my bare feet, and spending I try to spend as much time as I can during the day with my bare feet on the ground, because there's something about when you have your bare feet on the earth, you feel like a human being again. You can feel what places are soft, what places are cold, what places are warm, what places are wet, what places are dry. It's a totally different feeling, and it grounds you in a way and helps you to energetically connect to where you are. Like you said, you don't have to be, in some remote, grove on a mountaintop, in the Zirkles. You can be in your backyard and underneath, a silver maple.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it has been a pleasure to have you here, and I am
Thank you.
full for the friendship that we share. Ben is on my In Good Faith panel and writes for our weekly column. And I want you to tell us how people find you. You said you've got a podcast coming out. I know you have a beautiful website. If you'll give us some of those things right now, and then in the final, when I do the edit, I'll also include that information.
Oh, sure. So as far as the Druid Order, right now we've got, if you look up Dún Mór Druid Order on Google, we have a WordPress page up that should come right up when you do the search. And then we have a Facebook group as well, Dún Mór Druid Order. And the podcast that we'll be launching, we're going to be doing a half an hour of it for free on YouTube. And then we're going to be doing the rest of the podcast via subscription of Patreon, and it's going to be called Conversations in the Grove. And I'm doing it with my friend Brendan Ellis Williams, and then my friend Arlene, who has been in the Druid Order for a long, long time, and I'm really proud of, we just recorded, like I said, we just recorded our first episode, but I'm very happy with the results, and I think other people will be too.
And I'm thrilled to hear that you are doing something together. I just finished his book, and
oh yes,
he's brilliant. Another brilliant spirit here in Colorado Springs that we'll have to talk to sometime. But
yeah, you should definitely. I know he'd love to. Yeah,
I'm delighted that you guys are working together. Delighted that we had time with you, and I will include all that information in the closing slide. And I have a feeling over time we're going to need to do this again.
yes, that would be great. Thank you again, Ariana. Yeah.
My pleasure. We'll see you soon.